very much, ladies and gentlemen. I now invite Senator John Payne to respond to Professor Isaac's paper.
Well, thank you very much, David, and for all that you have done to make this conference possible. I can't resist a comparison with Josh Ober's very humble remark about the ludicrousness of having an American professor lecturing here in Sydney on war and democracy and proficiency in matters of war. I don't know which is more ludicrous, that or an Australian who is on record for having refused the Vietnam War, went off to a huff to old Blighty, and came back still rather hostile to war with a Blairite accent. Here I am, and I should like to make just a few remarks on Josh's paper, because you will hear from me if the doors are not locked in a little while. It is the thesis, famously, of Alexis de Tocqueville, that democracy is an experiment in exposing the limits of common sense. For him, democracy skewered talk of necessity through the heart. It highlights the contingency of things, events, institutions, people, and their beliefs. Among the earliest democracies, Athens, I think, was no exception. Its originality lay in its direct challenge to habitual ways of seeing the world, of regarding power and governing people, of living life. Some matters, such as the belief in the inevitability of slavery or the inequality of women, for example, escaped frontal challenge. It's also true that the democracy clung ultimately to a picture of the world that supposed that it would always remain the same, subject to what contemporaries called nature, physis. So the awareness that people and institutions are creatures of time, and that hopes and expectations at odds with the present could be put into practice in the future, was virtually absent from the Athenian polity. And yet, the qualification is difficult to overstate. Athenian democracy still managed to begin a process of radically questioning of who gets what, when, and how in the world. Matters of justice were no longer seen as given matters. Democracy changed the mental infrastructure of Athenians. It prepared the grounds for questioning necessity. It was a brand new form of open-ended government, one that fueled public discussion and controversy among equals to the point where political outcomes were often surprises, if not nail-biting cliffhangers. Josh Ober makes this point central in his reinterpretation of Thucydides and Herodotus. His very stimulating point, I think, is that Athens remains important to us because it demonstrated the political importance of publicly generated useful knowledge, as he puts it. He doubts what many first-year political science, government, and philosophy students here in Australia and in Europe are still taught, namely that Plato had a point in saying that the problem with democracy is that it relied ultimately upon the votes of fat-headed sailors. Josh Ober retorts, the Athenian Demokratia did better than expected in competition with its rivals because of its strong capacity for technical innovation and public learning to solve military and other problems. The figure of Themistocles is rather a symbol of this democratization of knowledge, and I recommend to you a piece that Josh Ober has written quite recently in the Boston Review, where Themistocles is talked about in exactly the terms I'm going to summarize. Not only in 483 BCE did Themistocles persuade the Phoenicians that a windfall of silver should not be used to line the pockets of citizens with 10 drachmas each, but instead that the money would be far better spent on building up a fleet of an extra 200 warships. 3 years later, Themistocles also managed to persuade his fellow citizens that when the oracle at Delphi cryptically referred to the need for a wood-built wall, there was much discussion about what this meant. It meant, according to Themistocles, launching the whole Athenian fleet of wooden ships against the Persian invaders. advice, useful knowledge, if you like, that led, of course, to the dramatic victory at sea of the Athenians and the beginning of a long period of imperial democracy. Josh Ober, whom I regard with the highest respect as something of a George Grote of the early years of the 21st century. For those of you who are not in the know, George Grote, an Englishman, a Londoner, after whom a main street in Adelaide is named, for the reasons I'm about to explain, was the one who in the 19th century did more single-handedly than any other scholar to revive interest in Athens in a 6-volume work published from the middle of the 1840s. A good friend of John Stuart Mill, Jeremy Bentham, and others. And I think it's the highest praise that I can give to describe Josh as the George Grote of the early years of the 21st century, because he uses the example of Themistocles and the examples you heard this afternoon to appeal for the continuing relevance. As he puts it strikingly, at first I thought it was a misprint, the modernity of Athens in our times. But the case of Themistocles, I think, prompts 3 principal doubts in my mind, 3 questions about this attempt to have a dialogue with the dead about our living problems. I'll try to be very brief. First, the first doubt, the first question I have, concerns the relationship between, to put it very abstractly, the transcendental and the immanent. The question is, does democracy functionally require a shared sense of the transcendental, of some kind of religiosity? After all, doesn't the case of Themistocles show that the Athenians felt their lives to be anchored firmly in a polytheistic universe of gods and goddesses who infused that democracy and its learning with a strong sense of sacred standards for life on earth? Didn't the so-called knowledge of the Athenians depend upon trust in the deities? Did they not place great hopes in them? Did they not fear them? And is it not true that we do not? That this, perhaps, is our problem, that our pragmatic knowledge has no transcendental guarantees, no ultimate external safeguards. Second question, a tougher point that I think our friendship will survive. What does it mean to speak of useful knowledge? What are the criteria of its veracity? Josh, I think, understands useful knowledge in rather pragmatist terms. Knowledge generated by the development of skill sets that work, that produce results. I think he uses the term both in a narrow scientific technical sense, but also to refer to social and I think also political knowledge, terms which are not so familiar to the Athenians. But that is why, so understood, he's attracted to Thucydides' emphasis on innovation, on design, on swiftness of execution, on adventure, on daring, on sanguinity, on the constant improvement of technique, as Thucydides puts it. This, of course, is Charles Sanders Peirce, it's Karl Popper. It is a species of Max Weber's Zweckrationalität. It's a touch of rational choice theory, perhaps a hint of Napoleon. On fait et on voit. One acts, then one sees. But what becomes of ethics in this scheme, we could ask? Surely the power to live in a certain way is not equivalent to the matter of whether living in that way is a good thing. I want to note, just in passing, that one of the striking paradoxes of the Athenian Demokratia is that there's no great democratic theorist. There is no justification, elaborate justification for why democracy is a good thing. That's because the technical skill of empowerment and of extension of Athenian power is equivalent to democracy, which for us should be strange. But not only that, after Wittgenstein, we might ask, is it really possible to suppose, with any measure of self-assurance, that utility, the useful, is uncontroversial? Does not useful knowledge depend not upon success, but upon the acknowledgement of others, as Wittgenstein puts it? We could say that utility and useful knowledge have lost their virginity. As we now see with knowledge associated, for example, with nuclear physics or stem cell research or nanotechnologies or techniques to do, say, with public-private partnerships, utility is a matter ultimately of politics. The inescapability of politics I can't underemphasize. In the matter of knowledge, I happen to think that there is a different and better way of speaking about democracy. I happen to think that the attempt to take democracy, so to say, down the road of useful knowledge, in fact, will end up in a blind alley, because I think the striking thing for me, and much can be learned indeed from the Athenian experience, is the fact that democracy at its best is humility. It is a system for reflexively and justly puncturing inflated expectations, of calling bullshit, of handling risk, of dealing with unpredictability, of making the best of bad outcomes. In short, of reversing bad decisions, of avoiding decisions that probably will produce bad outcomes. And it was, I think, exactly this understanding that the great strength of democracy is not what it knows, but its great strength is that it teaches its citizens and its leaders that not everything is knowable, that know-alls are not good for democracy. This was exactly the point made in, interestingly, the same month as these diggers sat in the sun on the Acropolis by a young, brilliant journalist in London who later became leader of the Labour Party, Michael Foot, who, in a very famous piece in that month of 1941, said that we will win this war against the Nazis. This was, of course, at the point at which parliamentary democracy looked as though it might well go down into the channel, down the tubes. And we will win this war, said Michael Foot, because we will keep our leaders in check. We will prevent hubris. We will prevent folly. We will prevent stupidity. And that's a kind of learning that I think doesn't easily fit into the category of knowledge. It has much more to do with humility, with doubt, and with a handling of the unforeseen. Finally, this brings me to the question of expertise. This is the relationship of expertise, which is very interestingly raised in Josh's paper, has been neglected for a very long time in theories of democracy. I think the last great treatment of it, it deserves a renaissance, was Walter Lippmann's accounts of it and defense of expertise in the 1920s. He's one of the great American journalists of the first half of the 20th century. The question is there room in a democracy for expertise? And if so, what is its proper relation? What are their proper relationship? Josh praises Athens for, as he puts it, the widely distributed expertise in that polity, say in the matter of rowing a trireme. This, of course, is a deliberate anachronism. Surely Themistocles or trireme rowers were not experts in any recognizably modern sense, if only because the very words expert, expertise are products of the 19th century, at least in the English language. It was in that century that such words came into being, and they came to refer to someone with special knowledge, someone blessed with the quality of being a top dog in a particular field of knowledge or technical skill. And in that meaning, there developed a problem. Hostility towards experts from Democrats stems from that period. Many Democrats believed in that century, and today still believe, that expertise and democracy don't mix, that the very idea of expertise is an insult to democracy, either because everybody is an expert or nobody is an expert. The questions are still heard today. How possibly can Democrats approve of claims to superior knowledge and technical know-how, it is asked? Surely the arrogance of experts and their claims clash openly with the democratic principle of equality of all people and their opinions. Isn't the so-called knowledge on which experts stake their know-all claims bound up with power, even a bid for power over others? Isn't scientific, technical, or professional expertise an ally of the originally Platonic view that men and women should never be without a leader, that they should never sleep, get up, wash, eat, or do anything else unless they take their cue faithfully from those who know better than themselves? Well, here then are three devilish questions to do with democracy's relationship to transcendental standards, the meaning and limits of so-called useful knowledge, and the tensions between democracy and expertise. You can see that I am rather doubtful about both the plausibility and usefulness of the useful knowledge paradigm, and doubtful perhaps as well about this about the significance of Athenian prowess and what it can teach us positively. And I do so because today I think we are no longer Greeks. We experience problems with the meaning and institutions of democracy that cannot be resolved within the terms in which they were originally posed and presented in Athens. But, Josh, I could just be persuaded otherwise. Thank you very much.
I want to thank John Keane for that, very both generous, thoughtful, provocative, learned response. I won't say very much in response to the response, because otherwise he'll have to respond to my response, and it'll get to sort of but let me just say a few things just about his three big points. About the transcendental and immanent question. It's very hard to say. I mean, that I think that what's interesting to me is that the world of Greek religion is clearly radically different from the kinds of religious experiences that we can begin to try to intuit from both the grand traditions of the Near East and the grand traditions of the medieval West, or even the late modern West and forward. So that Greece is neither the world in which kingship was sent down from the gods, along with laws being sent down from the gods, along with all possible details about how best to live our lives being sent down from the gods. I mean, that's one transcendental universe, and that is, I think, the universe of Mesopotamia, so we can begin to try to grasp it from the marvelous poetry from that period. So the Greek city-states don't have this. They don't have gods as the originators of law. Law is a very human thing. The political universe is a human thing. The choices that are being made about what to do because Apollo gives advice are choices that come because the Athenians have chosen to give advice, not because the gods have given us scriptures that we must pay attention to, but because they've chosen to take advice, and there's no right way to interpret that advice, and that's clear throughout Greek literature. And I don't have to, I think, say about the ways in which a polytheistic world is not transcendental in the way that any of the revealed religions of the monotheistic tradition or the multiple monotheistic traditions are. So, sure, the Greeks cared a lot about their gods, but their gods are not, as it were, forces in their lives in the same way as the gods of before and the gods of after. There's something going on differently about the Greek world, and I think it behooves us to pay attention to that. In terms of what's knowledge useful for, should we even be worried about a use at all after Wittgenstein? I think we have to be. It seems to me that the kind of proficiency, economic and military, that I was talking about is necessary for democratic communities, democratic societies, if they're going to be able to compete successfully with non-democratic communities and societies with hierarchical and command and control forms of human organization. If we cannot compete successfully, we as democratic states or democratic organizations generally cannot compete successfully. Darwinian pressure will ensure that we do not exist as that form of social organization, and I think that would be a terrible loss. So what I would say is the kind of project I'm engaged in now, trying to think about how knowledge allows for proficiency, is what some organizational theorists call a satisficing condition, not a sufficient condition. It doesn't give you a way to live your life, a reason to live your life. It doesn't tell you what the best way to live your life might be. But it gives you the basic material conditions, or the potential of the basic material conditions, economic conditions, security conditions, in which it may be possible for you to make the ethical decisions that, as John exactly rightly suggests, we should all be spending a lot of energy trying to make. Finally, on expertise, here I would turn to Plato's dialogue Protagoras, in which at one point in this lovely dialogue, Socrates, who's having this conversation in private with Protagoras, says, well, that's all very fine and well, Protagoras, because you claim to have a political expertise and to be able to teach it to your students, but I actually prefer the way that the wise Athenians organize things. And the Athenians, the wise Athenians, there's some irony there for Socrates' point, he says, attend to experts on matters in which there is expertise. So when they gather together in their assemblies, and it is a matter of building ships, they will listen only to naval architects and to no one else. And if someone who knows nothing about building ships stands up and seeks to give advice, he is immediately laughed off or hounded off of the podium. And yet, when it comes to general knowledge, when it comes to matters of justice, the Athenians believe that no one has specialized expertise, and therefore they're willing to listen to anybody on those sorts of matters. I think that in some ways is the distinction that we're looking for here. What I'm claiming is that the Athenians were very good at identifying a wide variety of kinds of technical expertise, not just people at the top, not just the top dogs, but people who knew how to row triremes extremely well, capable of putting those various kinds of technical expertise together and to put them together with various kinds of social knowledge about people and relationships between people. They deferred, they refused to believe that anybody had general political expertise. They rejected the idea that anyone was a final master of what the Greeks called politike techne. The kind of knowledge I'm talking about is perhaps best captured by this Greek term techne, but since I didn't want to do a philological discussion of a Greek term here, I didn't drag that into the discussion. But I think that's the kind of knowledge we should be looking at. We should be looking at it because it is a satisficing condition for allowing us to, in fact, do the work in which the ethical work of deciding how to live lives that are truly worth living, how to live lives that will go as well as possible for human lives to go. And we should do that in the absence of the kind of, or potentially in the absence of the kind of full transcendent worldview that was manifest before the Greeks and has often been manifest after the Greeks, but perhaps indeed is not available to us, at least in fullness any longer. Thank you.